It's been a while since I've uploaded a video on YouTube, and I apologize for the delay. For watching me for the first time, I run a Telegram channel called Hindu Highlights, where I upload newspaper articles, and I will be using some of those articles in this present video as well. So I'm here to bring you the first chapter of Economic Survey in the most precise and concise manner, which is useful for Union Public Service Commission Civil Services Examination. My name is Vikas and I run a Telegram channel called UPSC Highlights. The address for this is given here. Moving on. After a lot of interaction with students, I've realized that they have this FOMO or the fear of missing out. To address that particular scenario, I'm using the extracts from the economic survey document directly. You don't have to make notes. Just focus on this video and use the same document for your revision. And you can add any points that you think are relevant for your understanding at the place where you can stop the video and add those points here. So we have the COVID pandemic striking our economy, and therefore the policy decisions that we're going to take for the future needs to have a context. This is where you have to understand two approaches which were discussed by economic survey, that is the waterfall approach and the agile approach. Now before we talk about this, to which part of the syllabus is this really relevant to? Now, if you take a look at the UPSC notification in GS3 syllabus, you will have economic planning as a part of your syllabus. Now, the immediate thing that strikes to your mind when you think about planning is probably 5-year plans. That is 5-year plans, or maybe after 2014, we have rollout plans of Niti Aayog where every year we have certain strategies. But the biggest problem with these kind of planning is once you set certain targets, there is absolutely no feedback on whether they are working or not. So this is what the Nobel laureate Friedrich Hayek dubbed as the pretense of knowledge. Just to add some value to your understanding here, Friedrich Hayek is a liberal economic thinker or libertarian who believed in market economy only. So he held certain extreme views and talked about the role of state, and he mentioned that the state should just confine themselves for providing protection, that is a sort of a police protectorate state, and not involve itself in welfare state. So this is something that you have to know. Economic survey is quoting this particular person, so there is a possibility of some influence on examiner's mindset. Anyway, coming back, what is this agile approach? So like I've discussed, this waterfall approach is something that once you set the waterfall in motion, there is absolutely nothing to keep it in check. As opposed to this, we have agile approach, and this approach is very common in software industry, especially if you are involved in product management. When you are building a product, there is a need to check every minute step from all possible scenarios. Why are we talking about this and what is the practical implication for Indian economy? Let us understand. Let's say in 2019, the government came up with certain policy measures, but the pandemic stuck and we can no longer take the same path. The world has fundamentally transformed in 2020 and 21. So, what is the way forward in such uncertainty? This is where agile approach comes into picture. So the biggest problem is if you take a look at almost all the surveys, like say NSSO survey or census, etc., etc., we have data that is almost 10 years old data. But today, in the world of big data and artificial intelligence, there is a possibility of real time data where we can take decisions based on the updated data from time to time. So this is what we are going to do in agile framework. We are going to take some tiny steps, and those tiny steps will decide our future. So this is the agile approach. This is all you have to know from the preface of the economic survey. What is waterfall approach and what is agile approach? Agile approach is taking tiny steps towards the future based on real-time data. That's all. In an economy, there are two sides. One, where goods are produced, that is the supply side, and the other end is where goods are consumed, that is the demand end. Pandemic has fundamentally affected both the sides. Supply side, because of the lockdown scenario, all the sites of production were virtually shut down, leading to shortage of supply. And since they were shut down, people did not have money, and therefore demand was also uh, down. So consumption also came down. This provided the government with a unique opportunity to address the fundamental issues that were plaguing our Indian economy even before 2020. This paragraph specifically talks about such kind of reforms which are needed by the government. Those include deregulation, that is the kind of hold that the government has on industries for complying with laws. This is seen as one of the biggest roadblock for a lot of companies in our country. So process simplification, because harassment from government officials has been the legacy of the Inspector Raj era, and that is why we have had privatization. So even disinvestment, and the recent example of Air India getting privatized is one such measure. Then we have foreign exchange reserves accumulation because of the pandemic situation, where we have a current account surplus, which we'll be talking about in future lectures. That is also one aspect. Inflation targeting, which has been the duty of RBI to contain the growth of prices. Housing for all, insolvency and bankruptcy code, which we'll be discussing in further chapters, and also social capital like health insurance, financial inclusion, infrastructure spending, which we'll be dealing in further lectures in detail. So this is a sort of an introduction, and I'm just giving you what the government intends to do in the future. Like, what is the roadmap for government in the next few years? You can find that in this paragraph, and you can expect questions on each of these topics: deregulation, process simplification, etc., etc. Moving on. Another highlight about this year's economic survey is that after 1960s, because of the disconnection between volume 1 and volume 2 of economic survey, the survey reverts to a single volume economic survey this time, and it emphasizes that there is a connection between various statistical data presented with the central themes which are there in this volume. So it also talked about the usage of satellites and geospatial images for certain phenomena like urbanization, environmental impact assessment, etc., etc. We will again deal with these issues in further chapters on further lectures. So moving on. This year's mains had a question on K-shaped growth, where certain sectors grow at a much faster rate and certain sectors are lagging behind. So this is probably from the previous year's economic survey. And we have the V-shaped growth in this present economic survey. So what do you mean by this V-shaped growth? Basically, when we're talking about gross domestic product, it is about the money that an economy generates in a specific financial year. So when the lockdowns were induced, like we have discussed, there were supply side shocks and demand side shocks, and therefore GDP fell down. After the lockdowns were eased, again you have an upward trend, and obviously you have the second wave, where it was disastrous, not just for economy but also for a lot of families in our country, experiencing unprecedented pain in the post-independent history of our country. Again, after the dark phase, we are seeing an upward trend. So this is what you mean by a V-shaped economic growth. So this graph says that we have almost reached the pre-pandemic levels of growth. You have to remember this point. We have reached the pre-pandemic levels of growth. That is, in 2019-20, whatever growth we have witnessed, we're almost there. Again, in this context, we have a question in UPSC Mains 2021. What is the new GDP methodology in our country? A lot of students ask me this question. This is a very straightforward textbook is answer, but if you want to know the answer, here it is. So basically, In 2005, there was a committee called Rangarajan Committee, which recommended the creation of National Statistics Commission. And the intention was to reduce the problems which statistical agencies face. Like say you have CSO, NSSO, all these organizations or sample surveys, uh, they had data collection problem because of non-cooperation from various ministries. So if you have a nodal agency, can surely ease the process, and that is the intent with which we have NSC. In 2015, NSC came up with a recommendation to match with United Nations System of National Accounts in 2008 because it is the internationally accepted standard and it will become easy for international bodies to compare our data with theirs. So it is an accounting standard and we move to that. So what are these changes? The first one is uh, NSC recommended that we change our base year every 5 years because let's say in 2004 and 5 we might be using some obsolete commodity like say for example a floppy disk or a CD. This generation no longer uses a CD and a floppy disk. So time and again there is a need to change the base year and the basket of goods that will be considering for the calculation of our GDP. So taking that recommendation into consideration, we have changed the base year. That is the first change. Marketplaces replace the factor cost because factor cost is not a real metric for growth. And the third one is previously we used to take data from annual survey of industries, which roughly had around probably 2 lakh factories. But using the Commerce Ministry's MCA 21 data, we have data of nearly 5 lakh registered companies from 2011-12. So we started taking that data, which is much more accurate, and also we've included financial corporations and regulators like SEBI, RBI, etc. And the biggest change is we started considering even livestock, like say for example our dairy industry, even that is considered into agricultural income and which gives a better picture of our Indian economy. So these are the changes. So this is the answer for the question that was asked in UPSC 2021. So this table presented the fundamental uh, growth of various sectors. So here is where we're talking about GVA. Now, what is the relation between GDP and GVA? So please post your answers in the comment section below. And you can see that agricultural sector witnessed the highest growth in the pandemic because there was record production. Similarly, we have recovered after the second lockdown also, that is the second wave. Even the industry recovered. However, you can't say the same thing about services because take a look at this. Services also has the component of hotels, and there is also this aspect of tourism. That sector has not recovered yet because people are still afraid of the third wave or the Omicron variant and they're not moving out. Similarly, if you take a look at other services like tourism industry or transport sector, they have not recovered completely, like aviation. As a result of all this, the services industry has, for the first time in a lot of years, fallen down. Like the trend of services is downward. So if there is a question in prelims, UPSC prelims examination famously asks economic trends. So if they say that the share of services in our Indian economy has been continuously rising, that is false. You have to consider the COVID pandemic where hotels, transport, tourism industry, they were shut down. They're struggling to recover. As you can see, the real GVA of agricultural and allied sectors has been continuously increasing over the past few years. And one of the major reason for this is the kind of healthy monsoons that we have had. Take a look at the Central Water Commission data. We have record levels of water storage. That is one of the major reasons. Even the area sown under food grains has substantially increased in the last few years. However, you have to also remember the fact that Rabi's area has always been less than that of Kharif. So please remember this point. There is absolutely no need to remember the numbers, but just remember the trend. Similarly, When we're talking about paddy production, it has always been higher than that of wheat, and it has been increasing continuously over the past few years. Same is the case with wheat also. These charts are very important for your prelims examination. Just remember the trends. There is no need to by heart the data. GDP can be seen from the supply side aspect as well, where we use the GVA method. And if you take the GDP from demand perspective, both are one and the same. But if you take a look at GDP, we'll have a different picture. We will see sectoral analysis, and we already know that the formula for aggregate demand or GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Net trade, government consumption, private consumption, and investment, or it is also called gross fixed capital formation. Now, take a look at this chart. The most important trend that you have to notice is private consumption, or simply called household consumption. This is not yet at the levels of pre-pandemic era, that is in 2019. How was it like? We have not reached that stage yet. So UPSC has a tendency of asking questions on the nature of economic growth. So if you take a look at the previous year questions, we have had questions on jobless growth. Now this is a question that is possible. They might ask about a growth where private consumption is left out. What is the reason for households not consuming, and what is the nature of the growth? This can be a question. Or simply put, why are we not witnessing a growth in the consumption of the private households or normal people? This is the only trend that you have to take away from this entire chart. Nothing else is really important. We have already breached the pre-pandemic era level of growth, that is more than 100%, and therefore there's nothing really to worry about. Traditionally, this consumption by private households is something that has been the major driver of our growth. Now, if that is not picking up, is it a cause of concern? Economic survey says not really. Here is where we have to understand something called high frequency indicators. In the beginning of this lecture, we have discussed in the context of agile approach, where we'll have data to take decisions for necessary course correction. That data is based on certain indicators called the high frequency indicators. The economic survey came up with 80 such indicators. It is not really important to by heart all those, but they gave a small example. Usually in our country, when demand or supply falls down, it is difficult to figure out for a very long time what is wrong with a particular sector. Let's say, for example, automobile sector. This example is given. Since there was a shortage of semiconductor manufacturing, which is also used in vehicles, there was fall in the demand for uh, automobile sector or demand for cars. This is the assumption. But a quick look at a high frequency indicator, namely vehicle registrations. If you take a look at that, you will see that there is persistent supply side constraints rather than actual demand, because there is a huge waiting period for a lot of vehicles, but vehicles are not supplied. This actually uh, cleared the path for policymakers. So this is the advantage of having a agile approach. Another important indicator which says that consumption is not falling is UPI. UPI payments are actually increasing because of uh, contactless payments. So we have a better indicator. People are preferring to consume something if they have enough confidence. Now here is where you have to know something called RBI's Consumer Confidence Index. According to this data, RBI also predicts that consumption levels are slightly increasing. You can take a look at this graph here. So we don't have to worry about our consumption. This is what our economic survey says. How did we come to that conclusion? Based on this agile framework and high frequency indicators. Please note this point, high frequency indicators. A beautiful example of UPI. Since economic survey mentioned this particular example of semiconductor shortage, I thought I'll bring to your notice the usages of semiconductor. What is it called? What is its role in IC engine? Which this semiconductor shortage is actually the reason why the cost of cars is increasing in the past few decades. So there has been a call that according to the IT Act 2000, we have something called critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure status should be given to semiconductors is what a lot of policymakers suggest to the government, so that semiconductor manufacturing is also central for our future growth, which is based on industry 4.0. That is, we are talking about new technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, etc., etc. So Paul Krugman, a Nobel laureate, wrote a very important article about the importance of global value chains and why globalization is very important for ensuring that the future does not witness what we have witnessed in the pandemic. So he kind of talked about the perils of deglobalization and the approach taken by Donald Trump in confronting China, that is deglobalization, protectionism. So that is not a very useful step, and that is what has been advocated here in this editorial. Also, there are four end use segments impacting the semiconductor industry, that is PC and servers, wireless communication, automotives, and consumer electronics. The demand for all of this increased in the pandemic. PC and servers because of the mad rush for cryptocurrency, wireless communication because offices were shut down and devices demand increased, automobiles the demand has been falling for a very long time because of semiconductor shortage, and finally consumer electronics like wearable smartwatches, etc. In the pandemic, health consciousness increased among people, and this also drove the demand up. So read about semiconductors, it can be asked in science and technology through certain MCQs as well. If time permits, I might make a video on that as well. Now, when we're talking about GDP growth, we are talking about the second aspect, that is investment or gross fixed capital formation. So what HFIs or high frequency indicators does our economic survey use to say that investment is also increasing? Basically four: increase in the number of private projects, that is more and more startups are increasing and they are even recording profits. For the first time in 6 years, we have seen the fall in gross non-performing assets. This is a very healthy trend. And RBI also takes up certain surveys, like say RBI's latest industrial outlook survey. They are also expressing their optimism about the future of this country, and all these indicators say that we are moving towards higher investment growth. In prelims examination, banking becomes very important, and this NPA trend is very important. In March 2018, we have peaked where even 11.5% of the total assets in this country of banks were categorized as non-performing assets. Now that number has significantly fallen down. So this is a welcome sign because of the stress that our banking sector is in. So this news article is important for that reason, and you might have a trend-based question in your prelims examination. Please note this point. And finally, we have talked about uh, all the factors which are really important to note for our prelims examination. We have exports and imports. So for the first time, we have witnessed a current account balance, positive current account balance. What does this signify? So what is current account balance? What are the components? I want you to comment because these are basics. So please post your comments in the comment section below. So what is the way forward? What is the state of our economy? We have discussed through our macroeconomic fundamentals, and what does economic survey talk about our future? So here is where we will be talking about a strategy that is commonly used in financial markets. Let's say you are an investor and you want to balance between highly risky investments like crypto, etc., and on the other hand, go for very safe investments to cushion out if you face any blow here. So there is nothing in the middle. Government wants to adopt this approach, aggressive on certain things and very conservative on certain things. So this is a strategy which tries to balance between conservative and risky elements. There is no moderate risk involved in this strategy at all, and this is a very common strategy used in our financial markets, which we are employing in Indian economy. So what exactly are we trying to say here? Let us understand. So the aggression that our economy wants to take is investing in infrastructure. If you take a look at our budget in the present year, we have gone for record levels of capital expenditure. We were investing on infrastructure. Why infrastructure? Because remember this keyword, it has the potential to be a growth multiplier. What do you mean by this growth multiplier? Invest in infrastructure, it creates further employment. Let's say, for example, take the case of Gift City. During construction, it gives employment to the construction workers, and after construction, uh, more and more offices will come up in that area, and that area also gets developed, and also the ecosystem for financial services also grows here. This is just an example given by the government. So this is the growth multiplier strategy that we are talking about. What is the other hand of conservative approach that we want to take? This indicates ensuring that welfare of vulnerable sections is not compromised on. So if you take a look at the UPSC highlights channel, we have discussed multiple times about the RBI COVID package. Okay, in May 2020, the government came up with Atmanirbhar package. We have discussed through various links. You can just go to the channel and just search on the channel COVID package and you'll find the answer. So this is what the government wants to do. Now, even in this aggression, the government wants to take this agile approach. That is taking data from high frequency indicators and then moving forward. What are these high frequency indicators? It is highlighted here. Let's say, for example, GST collections, power consumption, mobility indicators, etc. etc. So you can just go through the highlights here. I'll be posting the link on the channel. This is what you have to focus on in this particular chapter. Now, I'm extending this entire discussion to a very important aspect of public private partnership in adapting to this agile approach. Let me quote an important article which has stuck with me for a very long time, and we are going to witness a fundamental shift in our economy if we can tap in our private resources. What is that article? Let me show you. So this article is written by a representative of Ola. So they came up with a product called Ola Sense. Now, in the context of economic survey, we can use that as high frequency indicator. What exactly is Ola Sense? Since they are into this mobility business, they can monetize Hyderabad real-time road data because this is an app that is being tested in Telangana, Hyderabad for the very first time to take decisions on real-time basis for traffic management. This is just an example of PPP model. We can have multiple such examples which we have discussed a lot of times, and you can see such articles on the Telegram channel Hindu Highlights with the name UPSC Highlights. Anyway, so this is the essential crux of the first chapter. What else is important? So this economic survey also talks about supply side reforms and emphasizes on deregulation and process reforms. The need to distinguish between both. Deregulation means government barely moving out of that specific activity, and process reforms means ease of doing business. Make the lives of entrepreneurs easy in complying with your rules. Don't make it difficult for them. So these are the supply side reforms that Economic Survey wants to emphasize on. Of course, I've highlighted specific issues which we'll be dealing in future videos as well. So this is what the Economic Survey wants to do. Is that it? What is one more important information that is important for prelims? Let us see. Take a look here. World Economic Outlook. Which organization comes up with this report? It is IMF. So you have seen a lot of trend-based questions and also questions on reports and indices. So this is a mixture of both. IMF uh, projected that we'll have almost 9% growth, and all the other multilateral organizations predicted something similar. But if you take a look at economic survey, we were a bit conservative and projected that we'll only have 8.7% growth. So this is probably the first time in a long time that economic survey's projection is less than the global projection. What are the reasons for economic survey to take that stance? You can see that inflation is increasing in our global economy. Probably a central bank, like say for example, US, they might want to suck in extra liquidity, or oil prices can somehow deregulate or derail our plans, because there is a possibility global supply chain disruptions, like let's say if we have another pandemic or another wave of the pandemic, there can be another lockdown. All these reasons were factored in, and therefore economic survey came up with a lower projection. Another important point that you have to note here is World Economic Outlook is by IMF. So these are the points that you have to remember for your prelims examination. So if you like this video, I request you to subscribe and wait for the next part of this video, and also let me know if you liked it. I'll be posting the link of the PDF on the Telegram channel. You can go there and download, and I request you to subscribe and let me know if you like this. So that's it for now. Thank you.